All right, good afternoon, everybody. Time is 2 o'clock, and we'll start the meeting of the Turlock Subbasin Joint Technical Advisory Committees. My name is Herb Smart, and I am a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, and I'm just going to provide a quick overview of ground rules that many of you are already familiar with, and then we'll kick off the meeting. So just as a reminder, don't put the call on hold. Go on mute when you choose. When you do not wish to speak, and unmute yourself when it is your time to speak or you have something to say. Please announce yourself before you speak. It'll be helpful, but you're not required. There's going to be people from the public and also members of the TAC interacting on this call, just like back when we used to meet in person. We're going to follow the agenda, and there's a public comment, public participation item. People are listening on their phones and on their computers and able to see the presentation if they've hooked up technology correctly. Feel free and use the chat feature, and the meeting is being recorded. And the materials that are going to be presented, there's a couple presentations that are going to be presented today, are already up and online at turlockgroundwater.org. So that being said, I will hand the meeting over to whoever is the lucky person running both of the meetings today.
Thanks, Herb. This is Lacey McBride with Merced County. I'm the vice chair for the West Turlock Subbasin TAC. And so I will go ahead and call to order the West Turlock meeting, the West Turlock TAC. I think Kevin Kaufman is on to hold to order the meeting for the East Turlock. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, I am, Lacey. Thank you.
Great. So 201, let's go through and identify who's on the call, make sure that we have a quorum for both TACs. So I'll go through the agencies for the West Turlock, and if you're representing one of these agencies as a TAC member, please just shout out your name and that you're here. For Turlock Irrigation District, who do we have on the line?
Hi, this is Debbie Liebersbach with the TID.
Michael Clipper with TID.
Herb Smart is also on.
Great. And for the city of Turlock, who do we have?
I was City East Side Irrigation.
Who was that one more time? Did you say Carl?
That was Al.
Oh, Al. Do we have anybody from the city of Turlock? Okay, we'll go on to the city of Ceres.
Lacey, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Allison Martin. I'm here.
Oh, Allison, great. Thank you.
Karen Morgan, City of Ceres.
Great. Allison from Turlock and Karen from Ceres. The city of Houston, do we have anybody? For the city of Modesto?
Miguel Alvarez.
Great. We have Miguel. Delhi County Water District? Okay. How about Denair Community Services District?
David Odom with Denair Community Service Districts here.
Okay, David is here. And Hillmar County Water District? Stanislaus County?
Walt Ward.
Great. Hi, Walt. Merced County, I'm Lacey McBride. I'm here.
And Brody's here as well.
And Brody Patterson. The city of Waterford. And do we have anybody from the Keys Community Services District? Okay. It looks like we have 7 agencies represented for the West Turlock TAC. The 2 counties, Denair, the city of Modesto, Ceres, Turlock, and PID. Kevin, and that would be a quorum for West Turlock tax. Kevin, would you like to go through your members?
Sure. I heard from Al. Al and I are here from the East Side Water District. And Lacey, you and Brody here from Merced County. I heard Walt, he's Stanislaus County. And then Dennis, I think you're signed on, aren't you?
Yeah, I just signed on.
Very good. From Belico Cortez. And then Matt Beeman, I think you're on from Merced ID. Is that correct? Oh, you're on the list, Matt. But we have a quorum of the East Side, Lacey.
Great. So it looks like we have quorum. If we could just go through a quick round of the members of the public who are on the call. If you just go ahead and shout out your name and let us know you're there, that would be great.
Hey there. Go ahead.
Milton Treeweiler, Turlock citizen.
Amanda Monaco with Leadership Council.
Brianne Ramos, Mercedes Law Bureau.
Matt Brady, South Valley Farms.
Giovanna Morales, Leadership Council.
David Orth, Consultant, New Current Water and Land.
Great. Thank you for everybody for joining the call today. So we will go on to approve the minutes, and we're looking at minutes from June 25th, 2020 and July 9th, 2020. These minutes were mailed out ahead of time with the agenda or just after the agenda. Are there any comments or any actions for the minutes?
This is Allison with the City of Turlock. I motion to approve.
Aaron with the City of Ceres, I'll second.
Great. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from June 25th and July 9th. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are passed for the West Turlock tax. Kevin?
Thank you, Lacey. A motion from somebody on the East Side, please.
This is Walt. Yeah, I'll second. Walt.
All right, we got Dennis and Walt. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Hearing none, the minutes are passed unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So next is item number 5. This is public participation. This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the technical advisory committees on within the subject matter jurisdiction of the tax. Is there anybody from the public who would like to address the tax during public participation?
Yes, Lacey. This is Milt Treeweiler. You want me to start? Hello, everyone. I'd like to share with you information from a program I attended a little over 3 years ago. It was called The Effects of Climate Change on Agriculture. This was presented at the Modesto Area Partners in Science program on March 7th, 2017 at the Modesto Junior College in Modesto. The presenter was Dr. Amrit Ganashkara from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. He is the Department of Agriculture Science Advisor. And I checked, and he still has that position today, so some of you here may know him. He asked this question: is California agriculture production threatened by changing climate? He then answered, the answer is yes. Weather events can impact our agricultural production. He said agriculture needs water. California has irrigation agriculture. California uses about 36 million acre feet of water per year. The weather's becoming more extreme and unpredictable, he stated. He said, groundwater is like a savings account. You can't drain it because if you do, you're not going to have farming. He stated that Stanford scientists say that the extreme atmospheric conditions associated with California drought are far more likely to continue with the global warming conditions caused by humans emitting large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. He referred to an article from March of 2016 that scientists are making stronger links between climate change and extreme weather, and this was from the National Academy of Science. He then talked about climate change paths. He pointed out there are three pieces: mitigation, adaptation, and research. Mitigation is reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. Adaptation is how to change our behavior and management practices that can be used to help with climate change impacts. And the last piece, research, he said, which is very critical. He said that in 2012, of course, that's 8 years ago, the Department of Agriculture asked many farmers, what are you doing for climate change adaptation? And most answered they were not doing anything. He then had a list of effects of climate change on our valley. And here's that list. Increased average minimum and maximum temperatures in all seasons. Increased temperature variability. More frequent and longer lasting heat waves in the summer. Reduced number of winter chill hours and fog. Uncertainty in temperature range projections and forecasts. Climate change will have effects on crop fertility, quality, and yields, he said. He said California temperatures have risen 1 degree centigrade in the last 160 years and will go up 1 degree centigrade in the future. He emphasized, that may not sound like much, but that is a big change. In the question and answer time, he told us, scientists tell us there will be very little snow in the Sierra Mountains in the winters around 2075, just 55 years from now. I'll end with a reminder of my own. We need to start facing this reality today. We owe that to our descendants. Thank you.
Thank you, Milt. Is there anybody else that has anything for public participation? Okay, not hearing anybody. We'll go on to item number 6. This is the budget. And we'll start with Michael Clipper, the treasurer of the West Turlock CAT, or the West Turlock GSA. Michael?
Yes. For June, there was very little activity, or actually no activity, for the West Turlock bank account. So we started and ended the month with $111,000 and $111,071.80. Then likewise with the basin account, there was also no activity during the month of June. So we started and ended the month with $833,036.85. Any questions? One other thing I will add, I will be sending out invoices to all members here in the next week or two. So look for that in your email and possibly mail boxes.
Great, thank you, Michael. Kevin?
Yeah, on the East Turlock, can you hear me okay? There we go.
Yes. Go.
On the East Turlock GSA side of the fence, they had a meeting this morning. A number of you were there. At the end of June, I think the fund balance was $15,000 and some change. And then the budget this year is about $420,000 for the year. So invoices have been sent out, revenues starting to come in, nothing unusual to report in the budget. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. That's all I had, Lacey.
Thanks, Kevin. Moving on to item number 7, this is the Proposition 68 grant programmatic environmental impact report project approach. And Debbie Liebersbach is going to walk us through this one. Debbie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so if you want to move on to the next slide, Herb, that would be great. This is going to be a presentation that that I'm going to tag team with Allison Bryson, who is with the TID as well, and she is with our purchasing department. And at an earlier GSA meeting, the West Turlock Subbasin GSA adopted the procurement procedures of the TID for the use by the GSA, and Allison, as our purchasing department chair or manager, will be assisting us in kind of moving through that process. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the programmatic EIR and the components of that, and what we're planning to do. And then Allison will talk a little bit about options for retaining consultants to help us in doing the project. So as you may recall, the GSAs for the Turlock Subbasin applied for a round 3 grant to help us to continue to move forward with development, and then in the future set us up for implementation of the groundwater sustainability plan. And one of the projects included in the grant that we've recently received is that we'll be using a portion of the funding to develop a draft programmatic environmental impact report for the GSP. That project is expected to begin by October of this year and be completed by September of 2022. The round 3 grant will fund the draft PEIR, and it will be issued for public review prior to the grant being completed. And then the final PEIR would be funded by the GSAs and completed after October of 2022. The project was designed to enable the draft PEIR to be developed in parallel with and to help inform the GSP process. And it's hoped that by doing this, it moves us along a little faster and will enable the GSP to be implemented more quickly. Herb, could you advance the slide for me? Thanks. The scope of work for this project is to comprehensively analyze basin-wide effects of a broad range of GSP activities and projects. It will provide CEQA compliance for the program, enabling projects to use and tier off of the PEIR for future focused EIRs to implement those projects. And it will allow permitting agencies to use the information for required CEQA equivalent analyses. The grant funding will fund the preparation of the draft PEIR, the various notices, and help facilitate tribal consultations as necessary. The tiering idea is will help to expedite project-specific CEQA analyses by allowing subsequent environmental review to rely on the PEIR for a variety of items that typically don't change. And those might include the general background and setting information, overall growth-related issues, issues that were evaluated to sufficient detail in the PEIR, and for which there's no significant new information or changes that would require further analyses. And then also long-term cumulative impacts typically are evaluated at this programmatic level. Next. Thank you. So the grant application information. The grant application required that applicants clearly define the projects to be completed and to demonstrate the ability to complete that work. And so as a part of developing the grant application, we worked with one consultant, ESA, to develop that scope of work. ESA was also included in the grant application as a consultant that would be used to prepare the PEIR, to demonstrate that expertise that we would need to demonstrate that we could complete the work, although we are able to consider other vendors. So the reason we worked with ESA is that TID, as we were developing the proposal to work with all of these agencies within the GSA to scope the grant, we have an ongoing, or we have worked with ESA in the past, and so they have some expertise, and we knew they had the expertise to help us work through the project, and we didn't have much time to prepare all of the documentation for the grant application. And so that's where we started with ESA on this process. And if people had questions with respect to their expertise and what they have done, I'm hopeful that most of our staff in the civil engineering department have worked with ESA, and they might be able to provide a little more background information if people have questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Allison, and she has information on some options that we can pursue to consider which approach we wish to go down for procuring a consultant to help us with this project.
Hi, this is Allison Bryson from the Turlock Irrigation District. So for the procurement options for the draft PEIR, we have option 1, which is a formal request for proposals process. It's a formal competitive process that most agencies go through, so I'm sure everyone is familiar with that process. The pros are that we go to a minimum of 3 consultants, and they're invited to participate and to be considered in that competitive process. Those RFPs are weighted in evaluation by all the participants of the agencies, and then we do a short list based off of the qualitative criteria. We can have broad participation in the presentation process, where, or we could propose a committee to be involved in the process to review the proposal and then review the presentations and then make the recommendation to the TAC. The grant application information would be included in the RFP process as an exhibit so that all parties that are participating would have access to what was provided in the grant application. The other pro would be that we could hopefully have more flexibility using Zoom meetings for the presentation process, as well as going through the evaluation process with all the agencies involved. So hopefully we'd be able to have that flexibility. Some of the cons with going through the RFP process is, taking that time to coordinate all the agencies to participate. If all the agencies participate, it is also a quorum, so you have to have public meetings through that process. We would have the dates, though, arranged ahead of time, so we would have the schedule provided within the RFP process, so all the agencies as well as the consultants participating in the process would have those dates available to them ahead of time for the submittals and as well as the presentation part. It does take about 6 to 8 weeks to go through that process. It could be longer depending on the schedule. The one concern was the RFP process may not garner as many proposals as we would like to see. Sometimes when a consultant has already been established for a project, like for example with ESA providing the background on the grant application, that some other people think they have an unfair advantage. Since there's already one vendor that's been involved, they already know the scope, cost estimates, and the timelines. And so some consultants may not want to participate just because the work to get to that point is a little bit more. Next slide. The second option is to award an agreement as a professional services. For the pros under this, the TID purchasing procedures were adopted by the GSAs. And so to follow TID's purchasing procedures is that we don't require a competitive process unless it's a specific public work. And so professional services are once you have your due diligence and making sure and confirming that the consultant is capable and has experience and the background and the knowledge of the work you're wanting them to do, then we create a professional services agreement and basically not necessarily hand it, but award it to one consultant. The consultant, has proven prior experience and the assistance with the grant application, so we know they have the capability and the robust background to help us with this process in this project. They're already familiar with it and how it works, and there's no learning curve for them to take it from here to the end game so that it covers the entire project. The nice thing about doing an agreement is this is a quick turnaround time. You can negotiate an agreement within 1 to 2 weeks. We don't see any issues with putting that together. Since we're unsure of the participation level from other consultants, sometimes going through the RFP process is taking a lot of time out of everyone's time to participate, and then we only have one vendor that participates, which would be ESA. The cons, of course, would be that there's no competitive process that's going through. So it doesn't allow for other consultants to participate in the process. So it does have some cons based on that.
So with that, that's the presentation that we had. I thought what I'd really love to do is get some feedback from the Technical Advisory Committee on the approach that you would prefer to take. Should we go through an RFP process? Allison provided some of the pros and cons associated with that, or should we pursue a professional services approach? Either way, the GSA will need to take action on approving the agreement and authorizing us to move forward with the project because of the amount of the award. It is it's above the limit for enabling GSA staff to move forward with the purchasing process without obtaining board approval. And so there is an additional layer of approval process needed once we obtain approvals from the TAC.
This is Kevin. I'll go first if nobody else wants to. Thank you for the presentation, Allison and Debbie. I think you know, we want to look at who the best consulting team that can do the job. I would yield to and to Phil and the TID team, because you were working with ESA on this and putting it together. The one thing that was missing from Debbie's presentation was, you know, a discussion about the draft PEIR being not only for what you stated, but for also for being a support document for the water right applications that will need to be made to use water outside of places of use of existing water districts. And clearly that's the most important thing for many of the members of the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. So as long as that's included and we've got the best team assembled in the minds of Phil and two, then I have no problem with ESA.
Kevin, I did mention that, I didn't say it directly, but it was included under the permitting agencies being able to utilize the information for CEQA equivalent analyses. And that's really what they would be making use of that information for.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. But I'd be more interested in what Phil and two have to say if they're on the call.
Yeah, this is Phil with TID, and I've got only positive things to say about ESA and the work that they've done for the district. In particular, there was they were the CEQA consultants on our lateral 8 regulating reservoir project, and they did a good job there. We're very creative with getting that project completed and through CEQA. They're currently working with us on a fish barrier project in the San Joaquin River, where 2 of PID's drains discharge in San Joaquin, and we're putting up barriers to prevent migrating fish from mistaking our drains as streams and preventing them from going up into these drains. So there's a lot of Army Corps interaction, a lot of National Marine Fishery interaction, and Fish and Wildlife and so forth. And they've been very solid on those projects. So I highly recommend them and would recommend them as the consultant here for the PEIR. I just with all that said, there is a concern about, as was presented in the presentation, about is that sufficient justification for for the board to approve the contract. So that's just something that needs to be considered.
Phil, this is Kevin again. Is that more of a legal question? I'm not sure if I quite understand.
Yeah, I suppose it is, and it's a just making sure that we're adhering to our procurement policies that we've adopted.
Right. Okay.
You know, usually, you know, there's compelling reasons, compelling justification. There's a time constraint where going through a 6 to 8 week procurement process would cause some sort of a problem, or you know, so there's sometimes there's a timing justification. Other times there's hey, there really isn't other service or other consultants that are in the region that can do this kind of work. They're really specialized consultant for you know, those type of justifications usually sufficient enough or more than sufficient to justify, you know, going directly to one consultant versus a competitive process. You know, I just I'm a bit conflicted with just you know, sure, they're very solid and done very quality work for us. Would like I said, recommend them for this work here, the PEIR. You know, it just, are we compliant with our policies? If we are, great. If there's not enough justification, then, you know, perhaps we should look at the competitive the RFP process.
Hey, this is Walt. Why couldn't we do sort of a hybrid? In other words, create a competitive process, but not through an RFP, but through an RFQ, the qualification. We then get, you know, a range of responses. We then pick the one that we feel is best qualified, and then with that particular firm, negotiate a PSA and set up the scope, schedule, budget, etc., deliverables, blah, 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 under a contract. And then we kind of have the best of both worlds. We've created a process, a competitive process. We've gotten ideas from that process. All that can then be used to help design, develop the best possible professional services agreement.
Thanks, Walt. This is Valerie. I have not looked, or I don't have right in front of me the adopted procurement policy, and so maybe Allison would be more familiar with it. But and maybe this goes to Kevin's question and Walt's of what we can and can't do under it. But in the presentation, it says that awarding a professional services agreement follows the purchasing procedures. And is that because we would, I guess I'm wondering in what sense? Phil just talked about kind of a sole sourcing requirements or similar sounding requirements to that. And I'm wondering if Allison can maybe talk about why she thinks both of these would be okay, or if that's the question that we're answering today. Maybe that's not a conclusion, maybe that's a question that she's putting out there. But are there sole source requirements? When does the purchasing policy say that you have to do an RFP process, and when does it accept it?
This is Allison. So anytime we have a professional services, you know, someone that we're hiring a consultant to perform, you know, very unique, they need to have a unique skill set. You know, it could be a legal team that you're looking up, someone that doesn't have conflicts with other agencies. We don't really use the word sole source when it comes to professional services. Sole source is our definition is slightly different. You know, every agency has different lingo and words or acronyms that they use, you know, to do business. And in for TID, if it's a professional service, that you vetted and figured out that they are the best qualified for, a specific job, we are able to have that flexibility to award it, based on the skills and the knowledge and the experience. We usually get resumes, those kind of things, to confirm and do our due diligence to put together an agreement for those professional services. A sole source for us is usually more of a, like if you're going directly to one vendor to perform services that are hard to, or that are easy to be bid to somebody else.
Yeah, procurement.
If you, so usually in the professional service world, it's hard to really say apples to apples comparison of experience and staff and their locale. A lot of times they're specific to a locality that they have experience with. So it's a little bit harder to really do a good comparison. So that's why we call it slightly different in the TID world. In regards to the request for proposals, just versus a request for qualification, for us, we don't really have a request for qualification process. It actually falls within our request for proposals. And it also includes that they give us some type of not to exceed amount. So usually in a request for qualification, there isn't a not to exceed dollar amount, but since we know what that dollar figure is already in the grant, everybody kind of already knows the dollar amount. So the request for proposals process is pretty much the same thing as a request for qualification in TID's world. I hope I answered the questions that.
Yeah.
For
thanks, Allison. That was helpful for me. Thank you.
Sure.
So this is Phil with ID, and thought behind you're describing the fact that for this PEI is already established in the grant and it's publicly available, widely known. So that was one of the things I earlier about. Whenever I've gone to a board or a council past with other employers and listing a direct or call it a sole source contract with a consultant, was the common question is, well, how do we know that their pricing is, how do we know we're getting a good, how do we know we're not getting gouged? And it's always a challenge to answer that. I mean, if they have done recent work, then you can, and it was a competitive process, then you could look at their current billing rates, whether they're very similar or identical to work that they did 12 months ago, competitive process, and here we are today with essentially the same rate. Based on experience, the hours they put in, reasonable, that would satisfy the governing body, and we'd move forward with the direct or the sole source contract. Here, well, have the comparison of billing rates, what ESA has been billing for recent work, PID, but perhaps the fact that we essentially have 400,000, I think that's the number, that may answer, are we getting a good deal? If they are at 400,000 or below, then perhaps that answers that question. So there might be a question, well, someone qualified for 50. That's always a possibility, but, food for thought.
So this is Lacey. I don't know that we've heard any preference either way. Is there anybody out there who really likes one of these options over the other, or really feels strongly about a competitive process over a professional services process?
This is Karen with Series. I'm kind of wondering, are we under a major time crunch to get this done? Do we have 6 to 8 weeks?
Well, if we start today, we might. It's slated to begin in October, so so it would be, we'd have to really get on it and move efficiently through the process and get the approvals, and then go to the board for developing and implementing the agreement with the preferred consultant, and that timeline is complicated by scheduling meetings with multiple agencies, and then coming to the TAC for a recommendation before going to the board. So it'll be tight, but I think we could do it and begin the process in October of actually starting the work. If that's a direction.
I don't have a preference either way, knowing that the consultant that we've been discussing has such a good rapport. It might be worth it to just go the professional service agreement route.
John Landy here. Can I ask a clarifying question about schedule? Did I hear correctly that the PEIR isn't due to be completed until September 2022 after the GSP is filed? Is that right?
Yes. I mean, we can't, the draft PEIR can't really be completed until after the GSP is finalized. The idea was to start the process and engage the consultant team so that they can help to inform the process with respect to the GSP, as and the PEIR at this time. So as projects are to be evaluated and discussed, can also take into consideration some of the CEQA requirements associated with those projects as well, and look at it on the larger picture, and kind of move it forward together. So,
in summary, there is 6 to 8 weeks to use if we wanted to.
Yes, there is, but we need to really start on preparing those documentation and setting up the process and making sure we can make it kind of work within the time frame. Yeah.
This is Kevin. I would support Karen's opinion that although I like Walt's idea, I haven't heard anybody mention any consulting firm that would be able to get together that quickly and do this. And we have that ongoing relationship. So that's why I would support what Karen was saying.
Is there anybody opposed to the professional services route?
Lacey, this is Valerie. I'm not opposed to it necessarily, but I assume that in that route, the services agreement would be with the West Turlock GSA, or would it be both GSAs? I don't know if anyone's thought about that. But historically, with the West Turlock has been kind of the contracting agency, and then we have the East Turlock approve the kind of their sharing in either the cost funding or the benefits of the contracts that we enter into. I assume it might be the same, but if anyone from either side has different thoughts, I'd be interested to hear.
Hi, Valerie. This is Debbie again. So the way the grant application was set up, it was set up so that we would contract through Todd Groundwater and have the various projects subcontracted through them. And likely that would be the process we would do, regardless of whom we would want to contract with. Because then it makes it a little easier for the reporting and what have you for the requirements of the grant. Remember that all of the draft PEIR work is funded through the grant process. And so all of that would be included into an amended agreement with Todd Groundwater through the West Turlock GSA, who is the administrator of the grant on behalf of the Turlock Subbasin, both GSAs. So we'd need to, as you pointed out, get confirmation from the East Turlock folks on the consultant team moving forward. Then ultimately, we will need to negotiate with the consultant that we use on developing the final PEIR and then funding that work. And that would be a second step.
So the actual, if we did the professional services route, what would eventually be on the GSA board approval for the West Turlock would be a Todd Groundwater contract amendment to include ESA as a sub. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. Yes, for the draft PEIR work.
Right, got it.
Are we taking a motion on this today? This is Karen from Ceres.
I am seeking a recommendation on which approach to take, because that will direct us in moving forward with either facilitating a competitive process or negotiating an agreement with ESA, and then having that recommendation as we move forward with getting the approvals from the two GSAs to go ahead and sign an agreement to begin the work.
Well, Lacey, this is Kevin. Maybe I could get a motion from somebody on the east side to start things off to make a motion recommending that we go the professional services agreement route with the ESA.
Kevin, did you make that motion, or are you looking for someone from the east to make the motion?
Yeah, as chair, I'm asking for somebody to make it. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
This is Dennis. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Dennis. Do we have a second from the east side? Did we put everybody to sleep? Well, Lacey, I would recommend you try it on the west side and we'll come back to the east side.
Maybe that's a question for Valerie. Valerie, does this have to be a recommendation that is made individually by both East and West, or can we do it kind of jointly?
Well, there's no real joint action because there's just two separate agencies that are meeting together. But to that point, I'm not sure. The reason we usually do recommendations coming out of the tax are to give background to our respective boards. So to the extent that Kevin wants to tell his board that his TAC recommended they do X or Y, it's helpful. But if the West Turlock wants to have a recommendation, I think it's technically only the West Turlock GSA that would be acting, because they're the people who are going to enter into the agreement with Todd. I'm sure at some point, if I were on the East Turlock, I would want to take some action approving it. But I guess my answer is no, they're two separate agencies. So you'll have to get a motion separately.
Okay, so we'll open it up for somebody from the West Turlock GSA. If there's a motion from the West Turlock GSA to go the professional services option.
Lacey, this is Curtis. I'll make the same motion.
And this is Karen. I will second that motion.
Great. We have a motion from Curtis and a second from Karen. Is there any further discussion? And all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, motion passes from the West Turlock TAC to move forward with the professional services route. Kevin, do you want to try one more time or?
Yeah, I'd like to try one more time. Dennis, will you make the motion again?
Yes.
Okay. Is anybody interested in seconding it?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Al. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing no opposition, it passes unanimously.
Great, thanks everybody. We'll move on to item number 8 now. This is the undesirable results and land subsidence memos and feedback. Phyllis Shannon with Hub Groundwater is going to lead us in this discussion. Phyllis?
Thank you, Lacey. I'm going to pull Herb's screen over here as soon as he lets me share it. And we're going to go through some slides today and discuss the 2 memorandum that were provided previously to the Joint TAC members. And
you should be good now, Phyllis. I had to stop sharing what I had up there.
No problem. Thank you, Herb. I appreciate that very much. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as is shown on your agenda, we're going to handle items number 8 and 9 today. The first 2 memoranda that the TAC members have been reviewing and providing feedback from. We're going to talk about the feedback from the TACs on those memoranda first, and then we'll be moving to agenda item number 9 to talk a little bit about GSP monitoring networks to begin to pull that concept into our ongoing discussions for sustainable management criteria. So going first to the undesirable results memo, we tried to put this together really as a working document. I don't want people to feel like that what we have proposed here or sort of framed from a technical standpoint is the only way to do this and the only approach reasonable. There are multiple ways to come at this information, but we thought just to at least get the dialogue going and the conversation continuing that a memorandum might be helpful. The memorandum deals with sort of 2 general concepts, some working definitions for undesirable results for each one of the sustainability indicators that are applicable to the Turlock Subbasin, and then in most cases providing some sort of a framework about how that might actually be developed for the establishment of sustainable management criteria, including minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and eventually interim milestones. We received feedback. Thank you very much. It always helps so much to get this kind of feedback. I was really encouraged that the conversation is beginning to really move forward. The East Turlock Subbasin GSA in particular provided detailed comments, not only the comments with respect to just on these working definitions or on the framework, but also provided helpful edits on clarification and reorganization. And so I think that together we have a memorandum that probably reads a little bit better and probably is a little more useful. So we'll talk about the information that they provided just on these 2 things, but just want to acknowledge that there was some additional clarification and organizational edits that we also incorporated. The West Turlock Subbasin GSA provided comments from 2 of the member agencies, the City of Ceres provided information, and Turlock Irrigation District provided some written comments. And so I'd just like to quickly summarize those as we go through this. Please interrupt me at any time, please, TAC members, if you have any questions about what we're talking about, or if you want to provide additional information on anything that we talk about at this time. So just as a quick review, this is an example that we have seen from the DWR publications many times. And what we're looking at here is a memorandum that tries to help us begin to define the pink. The minimum thresholds are going to be quantitative, and they are dealt with sort of conceptually first before we get to the quantitative assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit about quantitative assignments of them later in this presentation. But just in general, we're thinking about definitions of what the pink is. And the easiest way to think about it, I think, is shown on this diagram, whereby you have water levels from a particular monitoring well. And when monitoring levels in this well reach this orange line, so to speak, then this is a level in the subbasin that is actually related to undesirable results. So this is how this is all coming about. We've mentioned several times that the water levels are allowed to fall below the minimum thresholds during the implementation period, because I think it's going to take a little bit of a time to turn the subbasin around, and time will be needed to implement projects. Nonetheless, we want to identify the target of where we'd like to see this basin operate. So that was the process whereby we put together the memo, is to begin to define what happens here. And I think we've talked about this in several occasions. And so I've tried to capture what we've talked about in this working definition. So let's deal with the first one first, even though I have the full 6 sustainability indicators shown here. This
so
is just, yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Will you go back one slide?
Yes.
This is Karen from Sirius. You're saying that when we do our minimum thresholds in the very beginning for water levels, we'll actually call it an interim threshold?
No, I'm sorry. The minimum threshold is the target for avoiding undesirable results. And there's nothing interim about a minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is a quantitative measurement, and it will be different for each one of the sustainability indicators, or there could be combinations of sustainability indicators that cover one another. The interim part comes in these interim milestones. It's another term of art in Sigma, and it allows the GSAs to look forward during the 20-year implementation period. For us, that time period is from 2022 to 2042, whereby we need to get our projects and management actions in place so that we avoid undesirable results. But if in the interim milestones, say in the first 5 years, for example, if we don't think that we're going to be able to affect all of our projects and our management actions in the subbasin, then that doesn't necessarily mean that it's undesirable results to fall below there. Now, we all know that there are going to be levels we want to avoid, going forward, regardless of what an interim milestone might be. It's just a way for the implementation period to allow time for some of the projects to be. Does that make sense?
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so continuing on with this first definition, again, focused on chronic lowering of water levels first. The feedback that I received with regard to that definition are summarized here on this slide. So some TAC members said that they wanted to note that rural and municipal wells have seen these adverse impacts that we've talked a lot about that occurred during this 2015 recent drought. And therefore, their recommendation was that minimum thresholds should be higher than the historic low levels, because they feel like that at those historic low levels, they were actually incurring undesirable results. And the recommendation was to operate the basin at higher levels than these historic low levels that we saw in the drought. And as a reminder, I wanted to just mention that we have talked about the historic drought of record, which we've just all been through, as a little bit of a litmus test. I think sometimes it is helpful to begin to think real specifically about what occurred during what time period, because that's something that we can know. A lot of subbasins get in the position of not seeing that they can really define undesirable results. Perhaps they haven't actually seen undesirable results for a certain sustainability indicator in their subbasin. And as a result of that, it kind of makes it difficult to begin to talk about it. And we had offered up the concept of discussing this recent drought of record. And I think it was a helpful approach because many have identified adverse impacts that occurred during that time. Continuing on with TAC member feedback, the suggestion was that this approach should not involve just drilling deeper wells. The TAC members also said that if minimum thresholds were set significantly lower in some areas, lower than in other areas, then it may be difficult to achieve the higher MTs where needed. And I may have awkwardly worded that sentence, but I have some maps, and if you'll bear with me, at the end of the definition discussion, we're going to take a look at some maps that will help us better define, I think, what is encompassed in this recommendation or this comment that we received, because I tried to think about what technically that might actually mean. The recommendation also continued from the tax that we consider a representative year for the MT, and in doing that, you automatically are going to be consistent with how the groundwater levels have occurred over time. So this is consistent with past occurrences. It prevents a selection of unreasonable MTs across the basin that are going to drive basin management. One thing we don't want to do is set something high in one area and then low in an adjacent area, and then the higher MT can't be achieved because the groundwater system is connected with the area of the lower MT. So this has happened. This is a consideration that has been widespread across the Central Valley for some of the critically overdrafted basins, and I think it's a relevant thing here as well. The additional comment that we received on this sustainability indicator was that the observation that most of the undesirable results that have been identified to date, in fact, all of them that have been identified to date, have been in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, and that the East Turlock Subbasin GSA really have not seen undesirable results related to declining water levels. Their wells are a little deeper and their options are a little greater over there. So that was, those are the comments that I received as I have interpreted them. And if someone would like to say that they recognize one of their comments and I have misinterpreted it, then I'm happy to have that discussed right now. If anybody would like to say anything.
So this is John. I'm perturbed by your use of the term undesirable results when I think what we're talking about is adverse impacts.
Yes, I have jumped to that conclusion. I think we so much that I feel like that the TAC members have jumped to that conclusions. If they have not, speak now. This is a specific quote from a comment. So I am simply at this point trying to represent TAC feedback.
I see. Well, I'm concerned by that terminology. It's it's a legalistic term in terms of what is the beneficial uses of groundwater in the basin. We haven't even seen any adverse impacts in the ETS GSA, let alone undesirable results. Maybe a story of two.
Agreed. And if I have misrepresented this as being represented for the East Turlock Subbasin, I don't want to do that. This is a comment from the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, and I can certainly, I'm not going to redo this PowerPoint
No.
But,
I'm glad to have made the point that it's a very specific use of language. And there are two terms in the regulations. One is adverse impacts, which is rather soft and fuzzy, whereas undesirable results has a very legal meaning. So I'm troubled by the use of the terminology.
Okay. So I just want to remind the TAC members here that we are discussing definitions of undesirable results. And if someone thinks that this is not, that we haven't gotten that far yet, I want to hear about it now.
Phyllis, this is Valerie. Hopefully my comment will clarify the semantics discussion we're having and not make it worse. But I hear John as saying we have to talk about adverse impacts to fix a quantitative undesirable results definition in our GSP. We haven't done that yet. So, if it's an undesirable result, as I think about Sigma, usually that means X number of violations of minimum thresholds. So we're not setting that yet. We haven't set that yet. We're getting there. We're trying to figure out where we want to set that. And the difficult thing about Sigma is it requires everyone to think about adverse impacts and where those adverse impacts line up with minimum thresholds and where you want to set that undesirable result marker. But I think what John is saying was we haven't done that yet. So we really, whether people are saying undesirable results or not, what people are really talking about are bad things. And those are adverse impacts.
Okay, that helps clarify, John. I apologize if I misrepresented that.
Is that John? Or
I think it does help. I mean, we do have to talk about what causes undesirable results, and that description is not quantitative. That discussion is required by the regulations, and that discussion includes these adverse impacts. The strict definition of undesirable results is set by an MT, but we're required to do that. So just because we don't quite know what that MT is yet, that's I think where we are. So the representation here again is from a TAC member, and if we need to change that terminology, we will do it.
Well, I appreciate, Valerie, you're jumping in. I think you have, we're spot on. And I should say, no quarrel with the definition of the framework at the top there, significant and unreasonable water level applies that, in a manner that cannot be readily managed or mitigated. That's all good. I just was troubled by, again, this very legal term of undesirable results. Some people may already be jumping to that conclusion that qualifies as an undesirable result, something that's happened. I'm not sure what they're referring to that has happened, that couldn't be reasonably managed or mitigated. But I did get a smile out of it. We could just call them bad things. Bad things, I like it. Sorry, don't mean to be too flip.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the comment, and thank you, Valerie, for helping us clarify things there. Okay, so I will.
Phyllis, sorry, this is Val again. I don't want to slow you down, but I do have one comment, and it's just kind of a cautionary tale from other basins that, and I think everyone understands this, but it might be helpful to realize how it comes into play. That we want to set our undesirable results as something that doesn't not meet DWR's requirements, and you don't want to put them so low that I think some of the concerns in these bullets here are triggered. But recall that if we put them so high, we are doing a planning document that's self-regulatory. There are basins who have turned in 20 plans that just turned in their seasonal data this month, and some of that seasonal data now in DWR's pocket shows that in certain areas of the state, minimum thresholds are being violated by wells for the first time. So, I don't want to promote mediocrity, but remember that we are setting things, and that when we start giving documents and data to DWR, they will begin to see where you're at. And if you violate those minimum thresholds, you know, you set them. If you violate them, then you've got to be ready to comply with whatever your plan has in place, or be in violation of SIGMA after the 20-year mark. So just a cautionary tale that these things mean something. It seems abstract now, but there are basins who turned in plans and who are now turning in data, and it's the rubber's meeting the road.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. The last thing we want to do is set ourselves up to fail. I will say this, that just because you have exceeded, again, and I'm going to just make everybody go back for a second, just because you have exceeded your minimum threshold in one monitoring event, that does not necessarily mean that you have entered undesirable results. There are a variety of other things that have to be considered, including your interim milestone and including how you've set up your definition of undesirable result, whether or not there is a need for a certain percentage number of wells to exceed the minimum threshold instead of just one. So
That's right. That's right, Phyllis.
So with that as sort of continued backdrop, let's continue on to the next sort of working definition that I had offered up. And that was the significant and unreasonable depletions of groundwater and storage. This did generate quite a bit of discussion and comments, and so let's go through this a little bit, because I think the comments on this have sort of made me rethink the whole process. So these are the comments that I received from TAC members. Depletions of groundwater and storage over the past 25 years are a significant issue. You might recall from the discussion that I had included in the working document, I had concluded that really depletions have not occurred. And we're going to talk a little bit about what I meant there. Having said that, this is a comment from the TAC member that says, no, they think it is significant. So that's very helpful. Not sure, this is another comment, not sure that the comparison of extraction levels to the overall amount of water in the basin is the correct approach, which is the one that I had taken in the memorandum. Extraction levels are also not being supplied from storage just from this subbasin, but also pulling storage from adjacent subbasins and perhaps even from the river. So comparisons that I made with respect to the overall storage in the groundwater basin don't quite give you the fuller picture. So I appreciate that as well. That's absolutely right. And then the question from one of the TAC members is, shouldn't this sustainability indicator be linked to the sustainable yield? And I actually think that that makes a lot of technical sense, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And then the memorandum appears to be missing the framework for this sustainability indicator. I certainly understand why this comment was made, because I didn't provide a framework, mainly because of how I had evaluated. So let's see what the technical team had put together and what the TAC is suggesting might not be the right approach. This is a conceptual illustration of how much storage has depleted across this one cross section. It's just to help us sort of think through what we're talking about here with respect to the technical details. So what we see here is a blue line that goes across this cross section, indicating groundwater elevations that were recorded across the area in October of 2015. So this is the drought of record. This is not as low as basin levels have been, but it's close. And from the scale of this cross section, it's appropriate to look at this. And the red line is simply my dashed continuation of water levels of what they might have been prior to this decline in the subbasin. This is sort of undeveloped conditions, as it were. And this is only over a 25-year period that we are sort of indicating this. Again, help me with the details here that this is conceptual and it's just an illustration. So I'm not trying to say I know exactly where water levels were before our historical study period or pre-development times or any other times. I'm just simply saying that water levels were higher, they have declined in some areas, and this is the amount that I was looking at when I wrote the memorandum about this sustainability indicator. The my conclusion had been that my conclusion had been that the storage depletion was a relatively small percentage compared to the total volume of fresh water in the aquifer system. We learned from our historical water budgets that we were about 1.5 to 1.6 million acre feet of storage decline in the subbasin since the beginning of the historical study period, water year 1991. And the total storage in the entire subbasin to the freshwater line is somewhere in the terms of tens of millions of acre feet. And so the percentage is relatively small, but is it really associated with undesirable results? And if so, it doesn't matter if it's 1% or 2% or 10%, the percentage doesn't really matter if we feel like that the depletion of storage is undesirable, an undesirable result. The way that I was viewing it, because the regulations suggest that you consider how it's been put together in adjacent subbasins, is the same way that was used in the Merced subbasin, when again they were looking at percentage of depletion of groundwater and storage compared to the total groundwater basin. And so I was just simply trying to be consistent with how Merced had viewed it. And our depletion percentage was even smaller than theirs. And so as a result of that, that's how I had viewed it. And I also said in the memorandum that regardless of how we view and define this particular sustainability indicator, the minimum thresholds and definitions of undesirable results that we make for our groundwater levels, for the chronic lowering water levels, in other words, this first sustainability indicator, will probably be the controlling minimum threshold associated with this process, because that minimum threshold expressly is looking at beneficial uses and wells. And so, you know, I thought we are protecting storage regardless of how we view the sustainability. Having said that, I did a groundwater sustainability plan for a critically overdrafted basin where I actually thought it was very much linked to overdraft conditions. And so I have linked this to this sustainability indicator in the past. The guidance document for sustainable management criteria sort of call sustainable yield out as a separate topic, which is another reason why I went in the direction to be consistent with Merced. The bottom line here is this. You have some leeway with respect to how you view and define the sustainability indicator. We don't have to make this decision today, but I certainly hear the comments that have come back from others about the need to think about storage loss in this subbasin, not just with respect to the overall freshwater aquifer, but rather with respect to being significant in and of itself. The chronic lowering of water levels is explaining the adverse impacts that we see and also degraded water quality that we see. So regardless of how we view the definitions of these sustainability indicators in the subbasin, I believe we're being protective of sustainable management in the subbasin because of how all of the sustainability indicators are working together. Nonetheless, I think that this deserves these are good comments and probably deserves a little more discussion, a little more thought by the TAC members. So before I move on to the next
Phyllis,
sustainability indicator, does somebody want to say something?
Yes, Phyllis, this is Milt.
Hi, Milt.
On this slide that you have up, I'm looking at the blue water line. This is an east-west axis. You know, that's basically what we're looking at. We're not looking at a north-south axis of this same area. Where would a cone of depression show up in this blue line that you have indicating the current water levels? How would it drop down? Would that blue level in a cone of depression drop down below that blue line? I mean, that's what it would show, or how would it show?
the blue line shows a cone of depression right now. And the cone of depression means that as you go, you know, sort of up gradient in the groundwater basin, instead we're going down gradient with respect to the blue line. So the depression of the blue line that goes through here sort of represents a cone of depression across the subbasin.
Where you have the double red arrow, is that what you mean? Is that basically where it is, or a little bit more to the east?
Yes, I didn't quite pick, again, I was just doing this as an illustration. I didn't quite pick the bottom. Maybe that would be in this area here. But the cone, so to speak, is generally here. And this is not, this sort of pulls in additional cones. It sort of merges a lot of areas of lower water levels. But in general, the water levels are depressed along this area. Do you see my cursor?
I'm actually just looking at the slideshow, so I can't see anything you're presenting other than the slide itself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which to me is just slide number 9.
Yes. Yes. And
but that's
so the
okay.
red
Other
arrow,
people can understand it.
The red arrow shows that the blue line is depressed with respect to the red line, and that was my illustration of the cone of depression. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does.
Good question, Milt. This is Kevin, Phyllis. You've probably done it. I know you did it at last meeting 2 weeks ago, but the sustainable yield, are we going to get to a definition of that?
We absolutely are going to get to a definition of that. Right now, we're still waiting on TID to provide us the reoperation of the releases out of Don Pedro or the Tuolumne River for the projected water budgets. The projected water budgets are the target. The historical water budgets are helpful. They provide us an early framework to start thinking about depletion in the subbasin. But the projected water budgets are really what we're going to need to manage to. And therefore, the sustainable yield analysis, which will be done by the modeling team, and we've done it in several subbasins now, and I think it's reasonable to begin the conversation. And that's coming just as soon as we can get the information from TID and get that into the model.
Sure, sure. If I've always said it's, I'm sorry to interrupt whoever that was, Kevin again. I've always said the sustainable yield is essentially the operational storage volume of the basin that's been overdrafted. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yes, beautifully stated.
Thank you.
This is Debbie. Thank you, Kevin, for those questions. And just so you know, we are actively working on getting that information for Phyllis. It's a little more complex of a question than it appears on the surface, and trying to make sure we have the right information is helpful. And that combined with the gentleman who does that work for us being out of the office for a little while has made it a little difficult and has taken a little longer than we had hoped. So we hope to be getting that to her soon.
Any other comments on this before we move to the next sustainability indicator? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the groundwater quality sustainability indicator. That's now highlighted there. And the comments that we received on this sustainability indicator are summarized here on this slide. The groundwater quality in municipal wells have changed with water level declines. That's been something that an adverse impact that we've been talking about in several TAC meetings. Most of the groundwater quality problems have occurred in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. Most of them have been with municipal wells for which we have a lot of data, and there's probably additional impacts that we don't know as much about because we don't have the information, but we do know that we have some municipal well issues for sure. There were also some questions on the sustainability indicator from TAC members. The questions involved, would there be different monitoring points for this indicator? Would we use existing municipal wells, for example? Would we use other wells? And will we rely on monitoring networks from others, or will we develop a network to be determined by the GSAs? And these are questions that we haven't answered yet. And these are all great questions. And I'm going to actually start talking about some of these today when we get into the monitoring network section. But I'll just tell you now that the best management practices that have been developed by the Department of Water Resources on this sustainability indicator suggest, well, they don't just suggest, they recommend to the GSAs that there be a reliance on other water quality monitoring programs that have been already in existence for some time in the subbasin, to rely on those to the greatest extent possible. And I think that's appropriate because there are so many water quality programs that are ongoing and have been going for a long time, including all of the urban communities and municipalities with drinking water supply, with drinking water wells that are required to monitor for drinking water contaminants. And so I think the general answer to this bullet is, will we rely on other monitoring networks? Yes, to the extent that we can, and to the greatest extent possible as recommended by the BMP.
Phyllis, this is Karen. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I work for the City of Ceres, and obviously we do a pretty intense amount of water quality sampling and have for a very long time. This might be a good question for Walt, or you, Phyllis, or Debbie even. When a well is drilled in a rural area, even if it's for agriculture, is there a requirement to do a Title 22 for drinking water standards for the safety of the water to be used for the property's home?
I don't think there's a requirement to. I'll just answer. I don't know that answer specifically. If it's an irrigation or an agricultural well, the answer is certainly not. If it is a water supply well, there's a requirement for water quality testing, but I don't know for sure if a full Title 22 is required.
It might be interesting to know what the water quality is for some of those wells, even if it's just, you know, the initial sampling for a well completion. I'm just not familiar with that for the rural areas, but that might be an interesting place to start gathering some data for water quality. It's just something that I just...
Right. Thank you, Karen. I've got a note on that and we'll follow up on that. And then I don't know if I read the last one or not, but the comment was that the minimum thresholds, if based on water quality standards, should certainly be current ones rather than future ones. And I think that's appropriate. We none of us can predict the future. Sometimes standards actually go up instead of down. Okay, so I have skipped, as you noticed, the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator because of our past discussions of it not being applicable to the Turlock Subbasin. So I just thought I would mention that quickly. Then when we move to inelastic land subsidence, there was a separate memoranda on that, as you might recall, but I'm going to just go ahead and tell you the comments that we received on this sustainability indicator now, and then that also will apply to the memorandum on land subsidence. So these are the comments. They were excellent. There was a recommendation from a TAC member that we recognize in the memorandum and in our work that INSAR is associated with an error, and that that error actually varies with respect to the location of the reflector. So INSAR data does come with its own inaccuracies and uncertainties, and that needs to be acknowledged. We also acknowledge that we need some type of verification to confirm that the data we're actually looking at are indicating land subsidence and not some other kind of ground surface activity. think I had provided the TAC members with an example of some INSAR data that I had used in other agricultural areas that we felt like were being impacted simply from tilling of the surface and changes associated with agricultural practices on the surface. There's a possibility that there will no longer be governmental monitoring of some of the benchmarks that we had identified in our memorandum as being potentially monitored by others, and that after 2022, that benchmark may no longer be monitored for the purposes it was being monitored previously. And it would be up to the GSAs if they want to continue to monitor that to survey those benchmarks. And that seems like such a cost-effective way to go that I would recommend that we strongly consider picking up those monitoring benchmarks in the subbasin. Maybe not. I think there's only one in the Turlock subbasin, and that seems like a reasonable way to make sure that we continue to monitor them. There's a TAC member suggestion that we need to demonstrate that any potential subsidence is actually caused by groundwater extractions. In this area, we don't have as many oil fields, but as an example, in areas where there is oil field oil extraction from the surface, that sometimes that also is a contributor to inelastic land subsidence. So there are other potential causes as well of land subsidence. And so we want to be focused in on whether or not our management actions, in other words, our operations of the groundwater basin through groundwater extractions, are really the cause for the land subsidence. And then this was an excellent question too. It really brings home the difficult job we all have with respect to quantifying everything. The comment recognizes that water level management could reduce future subsidence impacts, especially if we keep our water levels at or above the historic low levels. But the question was, is the goal to have no subsidence after 2042? Is that really our target? Is zero really zero? And I would just say that in other subbasins, zero wasn't zero. In other subbasins that have experienced some land subsidence, they have not seen impacts to the surface land use, and have determined that that's not undesirable results. So that's up to the GSAs, again, to define undesirable results for you and determine whether or not some rate of land subsidence in the subbasin may be appropriate or may be tolerated. I'll put it that way. Does anyone like to comment on this before we move on to the final sustainability indicator? Okay, and then the last one. The last one really is something that we have not done as much on yet. In fact, we've done very little on it other than acknowledge it every time. I just want to keep us thinking about it and moving forward with everything that we can move forward now. But I do think that the surface water depletion analysis will be much more straightforward once we begin to determine management actions and projects, and once we have our modeling done for sustainable yield. I think that's just something that the model can really help us with. At this point in time, I think that we can talk about this conceptually and we can describe it conceptually, but we don't really have a good understanding of the volumes of water that we're talking about until we complete the modeling process that's ongoing now. I will just point out that I put in here water levels can also serve as a proxy, and I did that because, oops, sorry. Because this was something that the Merced subbasin did as well. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So with respect to this sustainability indicator, the comments that we received from TAC members included the following. Shallow monitoring along the river will be important, certainly, to help us better understand and determine whether or not we are interacting with the rivers from this side of the subbasin versus the other sides of the subbasin. and that we will want to continue working with adjacent subbasins to better understand surface water groundwater interaction. The suggestion from the TAC member was that we might consider possibly paired monitoring wells on either side of the river so that we can determine with some point specificity what might be happening, and also an opportunity to confirm the model, because the model has been what we have relied on to date for surface water groundwater interaction. The comment that we also received that's shown here at the end is that the memorandum seems to be missing the framework for the sustainability indicator. You're absolutely right, and I needed to have put something in there even though we're not quite ready to determine how we can define it. So I can add that along with the other framework that we talked about. Okay, this is just one last example from Merced, again, trying to acknowledge what was done in the adjacent subbasin to be consistent with that if that's the reasonable approach and if the GSAs want to go in that direction. Again, in the Merced subbasin for this particular depletion of interconnected surface water, the Merced subbasin said, well, we're not sure exactly what volume we should identify, but we do recognize that if we maintain our water levels, especially near the river, that this will automatically be protected. And so as a result of that, we're going to take our minimum thresholds that we've determined for this chronic lowering of water levels and use that as a proxy for this while we continue to evaluate that in the future. Again, I would recommend that we would table this discussion until we get more information, both from the sustainable yield modeling, and also we're doing, as the subbasin knows, a process of identification of potential GDEs along the river, and we'll pair that with our understanding from the groundwater model. I think we'll have a better framework on which to base this sustainability indicator. So what we have been talking about so far were the undesirable result definitions that I put forth, and then I also offered up a framework for how we might actually be identifying those undesirable results using the minimum threshold exceedances that we've been talking about. And so there were really no comments on these right now. I think that's because they're very generic and obviously will be modified with some specificity. But we did get one additional comment from the TAC regarding this description of our exceedance of minimum thresholds for inelastic land subsidence, whereby I went ahead and just, put the things that we had been talking about with respect to monitoring and how we might use the INSAR data for screening. I went ahead and put that kind of into the framework process. And the TAC member comment was, we really do need to be careful about INSAR ground truthing if we use it for this. And I agree with that recommendation. I think that's appropriate. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do quickly is to just present two maps. These are water level contour maps from our ongoing groundwater modeling. And I realized way too late, and I got this PowerPoint up very late because I was scrambling to get all of the TAC members' feedback reviewed. But I am so sorry that I don't have water level contours labeled on these two maps. So just bear with me. I think that the maps still help make the points that I was trying to make with them, even without the values on them. And some of this is just simply because I'm used to reading water level contours, and I know this may be a little unfair for those who aren't used to really looking at contour maps. But just hang in there with me, because all I'm trying to do with this slide and the following slide is this. I just am trying to get us to all think about the areas where minimum thresholds will be affected by others. We have areas of our subbasin that are, it's a kind of long subbasin, as you can see. And so we have some areas on the two ends of the subbasin that are really sort of controlled by, for example, what's coming into the subbasin in this area, both subsurface flow as well as surface water and runoff. And then And then in this area of the subbasin, we have, water levels moving toward the rivers, toward the San Joaquin, and out of the subbasin. And so there's not as much setting a minimum threshold here doesn't really control or affect in a negative way minimum thresholds that you might set here. But in this sort of central portion of the basin, we have a situation where the water levels and the aquifer response will only be able to hold the gradients, the horizontal gradients that are allowed by the aquifer parameters. And what I mean by that is if you set I'm going to just give a bad example that's not clean, but if you set a very low minimum threshold right here, and you set a very high minimum threshold right here, then you will not be able to maintain, lost my cursor, you will not be able to maintain this higher minimum threshold here because this lower minimum threshold may pull things below you. And again, we need to always remember, just because we set a minimum threshold doesn't mean that we're going to operate the subbasin at that level. We'll be operating it above that level at our measurable objective, but minimum thresholds say that we can go there without undesirable results. So if someone defines their undesirable results here at a higher level than here, then we can't have these two minimum thresholds in close proximity sort of fighting with one another, because the minimum threshold here might keep the minimum threshold here from being achieved. And I say that in the context of how the water levels have been reversed in this subbasin, whereby typically you're just seeing this sort of east to west flow across the subbasin. And because we have some cones of depression associated with pumping areas, then we have modified the flow in some places to be actually from west to east instead of east to west. And in particular, the cone of depression here is controlling water levels from, at least in this area, over. And so we need to be cognizant that even if we don't have certain conditions occurring in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA, that we need to be allowing for the undesirable results, if defined in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, to occur, to be managed at the level that they want to have that managed at. And so we're sort of all in this together is kind of my point here. And if you just take my word for it, because I'm so sorry I don't have the labels on here, but this contour level and this contour level are the same. So the cone of depression that we see here has expanded into this area and is probably affecting water levels, at least in this area. It's probably pulling from this a little bit, lowering some levels here, but not more than a couple feet or so, because the cone is so big that at the edges of the cone, it isn't a significant number of feet. But it does suggest that there's an area around here, and if you just sort of go between contours, this is actually not a cone of depression, this is a mound. This is an area where water levels are higher than the water levels in this area, and as a result of that, sort of this cone is impacting at least sort of this area in here, where I'm kind of drawing my cursor around there. So we need to be aware of how setting minimum thresholds in some areas affect minimum thresholds in others. This is model layer 1. This is the shallow aquifer. In particular, that changes contours over here in the western subbasin above and below the Corcoran clay. If I go to model layer 2, it's a little bit different picture that we see here. You can see lower water levels in the city of Turlock from pumping there, and a little bit different manifestation of the cone of depression from the east to the west. And in this particular case, you might look at the point here where the inflection of the contours are seeing the advances or the impacts of the cone of depression. But again, just recognizing that the cone of depression, even though it's in this area, it has expanded into this area, and as a result impacts water levels, at least in this broad area here.
Phyllis, can I interrupt for just a second? I'm sorry, this is Debbie.
Yeah, please.
There's a couple questions on the Zoom chat. One is for you. What is the contour interval on the two slides that you just presented?
That's a very good question, and give me one second, just look at my map. I'm so sorry I did this.
No worries.
Did not mean to do it, but I do have that answer, and I'm going to get it for you. And
then the other question was for Herb. Do we have the Todd presentation up on the website? I'm assuming that's a yes, but just to clarify.
That's right. The presentation, as is the PER presentation and another presentation slated for today, are up on the website on the meeting page for today.
Thank you, Herb. Sorry to interrupt your presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you recognizing that. I'm not looking at the chat as I go, and I probably should be. The contour interval on this map is 10 feet. In this particular map, this lower contour here is a negative 20 feet, and then this goes out to 40. So this is a 10-foot contour interval being shown here.
And I'm assuming that the previous slide had this 10.
It is the same
as well. Awesome. Thank you.
It is the same. It's a different. I can tell you what those are as well. Let's do that quickly. Those are here. Yes, it is a 10-foot interval in the upper ones as well. So they are the same. And okay. Let me just see. And then this is what I wanted to note. So the center of the cone in this particular map is higher. It's at 20-foot elevation. And this goes to 50. So these are actually 20-foot contours. No, they're 10. They're 10-foot contours, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then this picks back up a 50 again. So because this is a 50 and this is a 50, then this is where the sort of, we call this a stagnation point or the reversal of flow is occurring in the area. Okay, thank you for letting me go through that. Let's see if we, I think we've covered land subsidence pretty well with respect to the comments that we saw on there. I've just summarized them again here. We've already talked about them, so we won't go through them again. I did want to point out again that there's an attachment to this technical memorandum that does show how others in the Central Valley have also dealt with the subsidence issue with respect to undesirable results in the event that that's helpful. One of the things that I've been cautioned about from colleagues of mine is that we want to always be cognizant that the Department of Water Resources has not approved any of the GSPs that have been submitted. So while the regulations and BMPs encourage us to coordinate with adjacent subbasins and work with adjacent subbasins, it doesn't mean that they have used the correct approach to these sustainability indicators or the definitions of undesirable results. But I do think that many of the plans are well thought through and provide reasonable technical analyses, and as a result of that, sometimes that's helpful to see what others have done. I am assuming at this point that the TAC members would just as soon see me revise the memoranda based on these comments and resubmit. So that was my plan. I can work with the TAC planning group if that's not, they don't feel like that would be particularly helpful. So we will move forward on that. Okay. So then moving on to the final agenda item, and thank you for your patience. I'm going to be quickly through these last slides. I think they are helpful from the standpoint of just introducing some concepts and making us think about monitoring networks. And in some ways, even though we try to do all of this in a stepwise fashion, we go through, you know, what are undesirable results, what are minimum thresholds, what are measurable objectives. We go through all of this in a very stepwise approach. And in reality, I think we understand it better as a whole, and we can begin to put some specificity once we sort of see the bigger picture, because sometimes it's difficult to add details to something along the way. It's often best to look at the entire entirety of the process together. So that was my goal in beginning to introduce some of these monitoring networks. We talked a little bit about it last time, and I want to just take it one baby step further in this presentation. So just to review, this is from the Department of Water Resources Sustainable Management Criteria guidance document as part of their framework process and their best management practices. And it is a nice little illustration of getting everybody to think about, this is just a representative groundwater basin. It's certainly not the Turlock Subbasin. You can tell it doesn't look like the shape at all, but it is just trying to illustrate some concepts in a groundwater basin that there will be representative monitoring points. In many cases, those will be wells for each one of these sustainability indicators that's applicable for setting sustainable management criteria in the Turlock Subbasin. And so this well or location can be used for multiple indicators. And that's indicated by these sort of multicolored rings that you see around. For this might be a monitoring point, a representative monitoring well, for example. And that well might be being used for the ground, which is land subsidence. In this particular case, for groundwater storage, groundwater levels. So that's why you see sort of one well and then these additional circles. And this is what I've been trying to, and I don't know if I've been fully successful at this yet. So I want to use this map to say something about the process of thinking about these indicators together and how they relate together. And you might look at this and say, okay, well, with this monitoring point, perhaps they used this well to determine a level that would be a minimum threshold. In other words, would indicate undesirable results for them. And they realized that that water level that they chose for a minimum threshold is also applicable to and protective of the reduction of groundwater and storage. And that it also would be perhaps applicable to and protective of inelastic land subsidence. So it might be that that one well has a minimum threshold that is the controlling minimum threshold. It could also be that that well has a different water level for each one of these. And so you can go in either direction. In order to avoid undesirable results, however, the highest level, if you're using water levels for these, the highest level, of course, would control your potential undesirable results. So this is just an illustration of how you can link some of these together and use some of the water levels not only directly for the groundwater level indicator, but also as a potential proxy for some of the other indicators. The monitoring that we'll be doing in the subbasin is for specific GSP purposes, but we may want to actually have additional monitoring occurring at other locations, which may be indicated by these sort of non-circled black dots, not so much as sigma wells, but to meet other objectives of the GSP. For example, we might want to have monitoring wells that are very near where we are performing projects. And the monitoring there would give us a better understanding and an opportunity to document project performance or better understand what water levels are doing in the area of our project that really don't need or require a minimum threshold associated with it. We might also want to maintain additional monitoring in the subbasin to support ongoing or additional analysis, such as water level mapping and detailed water quality mapping throughout the area. So there's a variety of things to consider. It doesn't mean that you have to have MTs and MOs selected at each one of the wells that you monitor. It means that you select the representative ones to select your criteria that you may want to continue to monitor other points as well. So that's just a sort of broad level introduction to how the GSP monitoring network might evolve. And then obviously using existing monitoring network data has a lot of benefits. So the potential recommendations are here that I would suggest that we coordinate and evaluate with existing monitoring networks. There are multiple of them that have already been identified in our subbasin. I've listed some of those on this slide. There may be others. And in addition to making best use of existing data, which I think is always a very important thing to do, many of these programs have already gone through the process of looking for wells that would have longer water level records or longer water quality records, and can help us with fluctuations and trends and help us begin to see going forward. New wells are great. New wells are highly recommended, but new wells can't tell us anything about what has occurred at that one location in the past. And I think that there's always a huge benefit in being able to see how whatever you're monitoring has changed over time, and in particular at a single location. So this is just my plug for doing what the regulations already suggest, which is to make best use of existing monitoring network and to really pull in data from these other programs as it would be helpful for the GSP. And then again, the best management practices that are put together by the Department of Water Resources in their framework documents actually say that agencies should use, to the greatest extent possible, the existing water quality monitoring data. Because again, this provides you with an opportunity to see how concentrations of constituents are changing in wells over time. It also recognizes that there are already significant authority and significant mandates for water quality information and data in the subbasin. And I don't think SGMA was ever meant to supersede any of those programs, and not even to duplicate, but again to make best use of them and to focus on how the GSA's management of the groundwater basin could coordinate and might impact water quality in the basin. So with that, I thought I would I've just got a few more slides hanging in there with me. I am putting the current CASGEM monitoring network on this map just because these are wells that we already have a relatively long record for. Not always, but for the most part, we have longer records for these wells. And I know that the East Turlock Subbasin GSA has done a tremendous amount of work, and I want to acknowledge that. It's not on this map, but they have already shared information with me from time to time with respect to their ongoing monitoring program. They have been able to add wells to their system. So we will certainly rely on and incorporate appropriate monitoring points that are associated in East Turlock Subbasin GSA. So my apologies to those on this map, but I thought it would just be a good starting place to look at CASGEM. So I'm going to do that quickly. There are 32 wells in the program. 3 have been selected just as an example. So I just gave 3 a little red circle there that I'm going to just go through with respect to how we might be viewing these water level records for selection of sustainable management criteria. We do have data gaps in this subbasin, as we have recognized. We have almost no wells that are distinctly and clearly screened only in the western lower principal aquifer below the Corcoran clay. There are some municipal wells screened in the lower aquifer, but many of the wells, even some of the municipal wells, are screened both above and below. And so to be able to pull out detailed information in the western lower principal aquifer is going to be one of our data gaps. And we're going to be filling that in part with this grant. We also have some data gaps in the eastern subbasin, probably much less data gaps than I'm showing here, because again, the eastern Turlock subbasin has been doing a lot of work in pulling together their monitoring wells. There will also be new monitoring wells coming into the subbasin. The Technical Services Support Services Program from the Department of Water Resources has been working with the subbasin on an application and the potential for getting a grant for additional wells through that program. And then very specifically, we now have the round 3 grant agreement that Debbie mentioned earlier in the meeting, which involves 6 additional wells. 4 of those have been targeted for areas in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA, and 2 of them have been targeted for the Western Subbasin, whereby we can get at least two good locations where we can see water levels above and below the Corcoran Clay. So we're looking forward to this new data and recognizing that it will be helped not only in the GSA network, but going forward.
Hey, Phyllis,
yes.
This is Amanda Price Derby. I just want to clarify the technical, with DWR, sorry. The technical support services is not a grant. So I just want to make sure the TAC understands that it's not a grant you're applying for, it's assistance.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much, Amanda. That is, I can't believe I wrote that down. That was an oversight of mine. It is a support service that the Department of Water Resources is contracting with drilling, and they are going to come out to the Turlock Subbasin and actually install the well themselves. They're working with the Turlock Subbasin GSA on access and on details. So someone other than me probably knows the status of that.
I can jump on if you want. It's John.
Sure.
We are good to go on 4 locations with clustered wells, so we have 15 wells all together, one of which was down in the Merced Riverbed. They have us slated to go, but they have in mind to do it themselves. Therefore, we're in the 2021-2022 fiscal year. So we're trying to encourage them to utilize one of their contractors, who happen to be one of your team members, to go get her done with. But it's their money, as you say, so DWR gets to decide how to spend it. But they're moved through their sort of CEQA-like process to make sure there's no cultural or other environmental resources that are impacted from the selected sites. And we're into Sacramento for that process. We're really just waiting on this calendar schedule of them getting to the one. Sorry if it's too long-winded, but
no, that was very helpful. Did you say 14?
No, 4 locations
that
cover the basin pretty well. 15 wells, so there's 3 4s and a 3.
Understood. Right. That will be so helpful. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. And Amanda, again, my apologies.
Phyllis, this is Mike Hay.
Hi, Mike.
It occurred to me, we have a lot of entities that are regulated by the Regional Water Quality Control Board for discharge permits that have monitoring wells all over the place in this basin. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know how public their water level information would be or water quality, but I just wonder if we're missing a big data source, not looking at what.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have information from the cleanup programs and some of the other regulated facilities with waste discharge requirements that are in the subbasin. Most of the wells that we have seen that have been drilled are actually shallow wells above the Corcoran, but we don't want to miss that opportunity. So I'm just making another note to look at that again, because it is clear to us that if we could combine our efforts with some additional monitoring below the Corcoran Clay, I think it would be helpful.
And Phyllis, I should mention here for everyone's sake, I have a lot of information coming your way out of the DWR's database of about 20 odd wells with really long histories in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA that are actually, your 4 CASGEMs are correct and accurate and all that, but even they don't have that long a record. So I've got some much better records to give you, including the well construction details. So
yes, thank you. We have all of the water data library data. Is that what you're?
I'll point you out the ones that in there that because I found, for instance, there's one with a terrific long record and they know how it's constructed, but they didn't have their construction information in the database. So that's one, for example, that I
Okay,
can.
that would be great. That would be great. And I'm sorry to take all the TAC members' time with John and I to talk about wells, but you can tell that we are anxious to have high integrity data as we go forward with this process. So again, hang with me just a few more. I know I keep saying that. A few more wells. So here is a well. Let's start here. So I was working with the city of Ceres just recently, and appreciate so much their opportunity to share so much of their data and information with me. It was a really productive and helpful conversation. And one of the things that I began to think about was, in order to sort of look at protection of their well fields, what's the closest CASGEM well do I have, and do I have good records for it? And so I began there. And so I am showing an example today from this well, and then one down in Delhi. I know that there has been some concern about water levels in that area, so we want to start to think and focus about Delhi. And then also just for variety, one in East Side. So we just sort of bracket the Subbasin quickly today. And all of that are water levels and examples. And so let's start with TID 39, which is the example well closest to Ceres. What we see here is the water level record over our historical time period from this particular case. This goes from 1990 to 2020. And you can see just how we might begin to look at these water level data. We can see that in the drought of the 1990s, we had low levels. We recovered in the Subbasin, and we had higher water levels with respect to some of the wetter years in the late 90s, and then there was some additional water level rises again in 2005 time. And then we hit 2013, and we really got into the drought of record and had a lot of water levels decline. It is instructive to remember that many of these CASGEM wells are actual active operating irrigation wells, and from time to time, even if the pump is turned off, there's not an opportunity in some cases to know how long the pump has been off, or whether or not this water level that is anomalously low here that you see that I'm pointing to on the screen, and it's labeled pumping water level, whether or not that is being impacted from the pump. And so the process of looking at historic low levels would need some interpretation and some understanding of what this well was and what was happening in this well to the extent possible. But what I've done here, because we have talked in the past about the potential for using sort of historic low levels as our beginning to determine undesirable results, I've just put 2 lines on this example, and I've done this for each one of the 3 examples. One for the historic low, whatever time period that is. In this particular case, it was in 2018. This may also be a pumping water level, and the historic low might actually be back over here in 2015. Nonetheless, for the purposes of what we're doing today, they only vary by a couple feet, so I just left the line there as an example of historic low. And then recognizing that the city of Ceres has said, when water levels really began to decline in the 2013 beginning of the drought, that's where we begin to have our troubles, and say, okay, well, where was that line above your troubles, so to speak? And so begin to look at the potential for another example minimum threshold. In this particular case, the city thought that somewhere in the 2012 timeframe was a reasonable process as well. So this is, again, an example of how MTs might be determined at representative monitoring points. Again, these data are from the western upper principal aquifer rather than the low, and the Ceres wells are screened both above and below, so it may not represent the levels in their municipal wells, but it gives us an opportunity to begin to understand how we might select and establish sustainable management criteria in representative monitoring wells once determined. This process is continued, this example process is continued on with another example well, this one in the southeast near Delhi. Things are a little bit different down there. Depth to water is a little bit deeper, but overall it's an area where we have relatively high water levels. We looked at that on the map prior. And as a result, we don't have as much fluctuation over time. So it's the difference between the historic low, which in this case is 2015, and a 2012 low water level is not very much. But by setting, we want to, and I think Valerie's point earlier in this conversation of be careful what you wish for, because we're going to have to make it happen. By setting these water levels a little higher, we do have to recover in the subbasin and stay there. It isn't as if, we're already recovering somewhat as we get into, certainly the wet year of 2017 helped a bit, and then the wet year of 2019 has helped a bit. But we aren't quite recovering back up to these levels that we saw before. And as a result of that, if we are in a new normal and we can't affect this, we need to recognize that we were going to have to either have localized management actions to affect it, or we're going to have to pay close attention as to what we can do and what we can't do with respect to what's going on in the area. So that's just some general technical comments. But this would require recovery of maybe, these are 4 each, so something on the order of maybe 10 feet from those flows. And then another example, this time from the Eastside Water District, CASGIM monitoring well. Certainly I think these water levels that we see here are influenced either by pumping in this well or by pumping nearby. So they would not be really what we're looking at in terms of trends and fluctuations in this well. And we might be looking at historic lows in the area that are sort of near this area, which is shown here as a 2019 low. And then if needed to recover, and I'm not suggesting that we do, I'm just saying that if we move to a minimum of 2012 here, then that would affect a recovery of maybe, sort of 4 again, so maybe 9 feet here in this area. Oh, I said 20 feet, so, oh, you're right. The scale has changed. So yes, a recovery of about 20 feet in this area. So this is offered up as an example to start putting real lines on real wells within the subbasin, not as a recommendation, but as examples of what we need to do and how we need to think about it. And I think sometimes it's helpful to actually see a hydrograph and see some lines and start how we're going to make the sustainable management criteria that we've been talking about real. And next steps, at the request of the TAC, we are going to bring to you the final historical water budgets that are going to be available by the next TAC meeting. We'll review not only the subbasin water budget, but also zone budget set up in the model for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA and the East Turlock Subbasin GSA, as has been requested by TAC members. So we had some time while we were waiting on additional information for the projected water budgets and sustainable yield. So the modeling team is pushing that forward. This information should be available for TAC members, I'm hoping tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Monday, but I think tomorrow. With the preliminary stuff is already to me, and just ask additional things. So I think we're very, very close to getting this, and I appreciate everyone's patience. This is the revised water budgets that were the result of working with the Medina to be able to model conditions on both sides of the river and the river at the same time. So these are coming. And then we will continue with the projected water budgets and the sustainable yield analysis. I think that's going to be very helpful with respect to where we want to select our sustainable management criteria. And then this process in August if possible so that we can get to projects and management actions as soon as possible. We had hoped to get to there in July and now August, and we really want and need to start talking about the projects and management actions because this is really where the rubber meets the road. We have some indication now from the historical budgets of where we're needing to land, and the projected water budgets and sustainable yield will provide more detailed targets. So that's it for me. I appreciate your patience. Sorry we went way over. I didn't understand that the first part of this meeting was going to be quite the length it was, but appreciate you hanging in there with me, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks, Phyllis. This is Lacey. I know that there's interest in having public comment at the end of this presentation, and I don't want to cut that off. I want to leave an opportunity for the TAC members and the public to say something, but I do just want to give an acknowledgement that we are about 20 minutes past our timeline to end. We've had good discussion. We have a couple more items on the agenda that should go pretty quick, but I wanted to acknowledge for everybody, thanks for hanging on just a little bit longer. Are there any comments or questions for Phyllis on this last presentation on monitoring?
So Lacey, this is Amanda Peischerby, DWR. I actually had questions on the previous portion when Phyllis was going through what was defined as undesirable and setting up kind of those definitions for the TAC. One was I kind of wanted to know where the slide just before, where when you're setting for the land subsidence, where like focus on critical infrastructure kind of came in. And
yeah, it's a good question. The regulations obviously are focused on land use and surface land use and whether or not there are impacts to surface land use. And I think in terms of infrastructure that's on the land as being what is some risk. So this was, when we originally started thinking about land subsidence, we talked about the surface. What is it that occurs that is negative? What are adverse impacts associated with that? And everything continued to evolve around roads, canals, pipelines, wells, and that those all, any kind of structure, those all seemed to be the most respect to surface land use impacts. There is the potential for land fissures, as we also pointed out. I don't think, given where we are and what we've seen, that's as much of a risk here. But yeah, those were the sort of surface land uses that I had proposed from the technical team's point of view for consideration.
Okay, because it's not what is usually, like everything you described is not usually given the definition or the term of critical infrastructure. So thank you for walking through what that definition includes. And then another thing that I wasn't sure if I should interrupt, but there was some discussion on the sustainable yield, and I wanted to hear from you a little bit more on that, because what I heard actually isn't what's kind of defined in the regulations. So I just wanted to talk through it with you so I can make sure I understand. So the sustainable yield in regulations, I realize the department drafted those regulations and we didn't define it all that well, but we tried to define it as best we could in our SMC BMP. So it's actually not like, it sounds like what you were talking about is like an operational kind of what your basin's going to operate on, and operate and then demand so it's more of like a water budget number that you're going to come up with and supply to the TAC. because what the sustainable yield actually is an estimate of what is to avoid an undesirable result. So technically you can't determine your sustainable yield until you've set what's undesirable and set your minimum thresholds. So I kind of want to make sure that the TAC understands that they're two very different numbers. So what's in the water budget is not the same as sustainable yield.
Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful. I would like to point you to the guidance document in particular, because I use this quite a bit, the guidance document for the sustainable management criteria. And in that guidance document, as you know, you're DWR, so of course you know this, but there's a call out box in the DWR guidance document, and it's on, just for your own reference, Amanda, so you'll know what I'm talking about. It's on page 32. And in that little call out box, it talks about the role of sustainable yield estimates in SGMA. And it says that sustainable yield estimates are part of SGMA's required basin-wide water budget. And then talks about section 354.18 of the GSP regulations requires that an estimate of the basin's sustainable yield be provided in the GSP. A single sustainable yield analysis must be calculated basin-wide, and that sustainable yield estimate is helpful for estimating projects and programs needed to achieve sustainability. And you're absolutely right that the definition is the amount of groundwater that can be withdrawn annually without causing undesirable results. But it does talk about the sustainable yield being referenced as part of the estimated basin-wide water budget and is the outcome of avoiding undesirable results. So I think your point is well taken. Certainly we need to know what desirable results are, but I also think that a sustainable yield analysis that we're talking about with respect to the water budget is also consistent with what's provided in the best management practice. Does that make sense to you at all, or do you know what I'm trying to say?
I'm still struggling, and it could be because I wasn't included in I've listened in on the last few presentations, but I'm fairly new to being your POC, and so I think I'm still not clear. I guess I could talk with you offline, Phyllis, if the TAC is comfortable with that, just to understand. I just want to make sure that what is the department's definition of sustainable yield is communicated to the GSAs and the TAC.
Great, and I certainly would appreciate that very much. I don't want to say anything that's not correct. I really, again, am relying on that page 32 from the BMP.
Yeah, and it is a draft BMP, and so that's where, and that's kind of where I mentioned it's not all that clear. I think I would like to talk to you if the TAC is comfortable with that, kind of offline, so we're not taking up too much time. And then I did want to mention another kind of caution is if you're going to use, and I realize it's just, you haven't discussed the surface water interaction yet, but if you're going to use water levels as a proxy, that you really have to justify and show a direct correlation to groundwater elevation to that indicator in order to be able to use groundwater elevation as a proxy. So I think you've mentioned that in the past, but I didn't hear that today.
That's an excellent, excellent comment, and absolutely, we wouldn't be able to use water levels for a proxy for any of the other sustainability indicators without that type of an analysis in the GSP.
And then and that was really all I had. So thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Amanda. I really appreciate your input. It's so helpful to have DWR guidance. We're all doing this for the first time.
Well, so are we. So,
hey, Amanda, if I could put you on the spot, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about this now, we can continue this offline as well. But I did wonder if you had any comment on our discussion of the second sustainability indicator, the reduction of groundwater and storage? Do you feel like that, you know, I was linking that to sustainable yield, but based on your conversation just now, it sounds like that's really not the place for that linkage.
Well, it's really up to the GSAs, but it's difficult because I wasn't part of drafting the regulations. And the legislature, right? I'm not a part of that process. The legislature obviously kept this separate from the groundwater elevation indicator for a reason. And I think part of that goes back to the slide that you had, and I thought that was really helpful discussion on where you had the kind of that the estimate where you said it's a small percentage of the overall storage. However, you still have to define what is undesirable and whether that is that small percentage, is that undesirable or not. And so that, I think, is why really it's kind of our understanding of why this is a separate indicator. While they're related, it could be very different to the local agencies. They could be experiencing some issues, some adverse impacts within the basin due to storage, when it's a separate issue when there's a groundwater elevation issue. So that's why these are very different. And that's why I was kind of trying to understand how you define sustainable yield, because I was trying to link what you're going to do there to this indicator, and that the sustainable yield is actually going to consider all 6 indicators.
Yes.
So I'm not sure it really is going to drive what you're going to define here for adverse impacts for your groundwater storage in the basin.
I think those are excellent, excellent comments. And based on that, I think that our sustainable yield analysis, that I've been calling a sustainable yield analysis because it's more a hydrogeological concept in my mind than a sigma concept. But I think I've been sort of terming it technically rather than terming it in sigma in the sigma framework. And so I think I need to probably back off on that. And I bet when you and I have a couple of detailed conversations on this, you can help me make sure I'm doing the right thing there.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your input.
Phyllis, this is Mike Day. I want to put on kind of your radar screen, maybe this is Kevin's job, but the East Turlock GSA is in the process of looking ahead at what these monitoring program costs are going to cost, and make sure that they're going to do the proper process to work with their landowners to make sure they don't get left high and dry as agencies on the compliance costs for monitoring programs. And really that process is just starting. Prop 218 process. And we're looking ahead 5 to 10 years. What are these things going to cost for East Turlock in particular? And so this is all about cost, but it is related to the technical topic. So I bring it up here, just put it on your radar.
That sounds great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions for Phyllis? Hearing none, thank you, Phyllis, for running through those 2 items. It was a lot, and it was a lot of good discussion, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, Lacey. I appreciate the input very much.
Yeah, good. Moving quickly along here, item number 10 is special meetings for the TAC committees in August, September, and October. We had 2 special meetings in June and July in order to really focus on GSP development, some of these technical issues. If you've joined those special meetings, you'll have noticed that the agendas are really pared down to only focusing on a technical issue and working through that in those meetings. We found that they were helpful, that they helped move the process forward, and so we're proposing for the TAC to consider scheduling additional meetings the second Thursday of the month, so 2 weeks before the regular TAC meeting on August 13th, September 10th, and October 8th. And this would again be to focus on some of these technical issues that we're working through with cod groundwater. Looking at the participant list, I don't know that the West Turlock TAC still has a quorum. I think we might have lost our quorum when we lost a few attendees, but perhaps the East Turlock TAC could take an action to schedule these meetings, and then the West Turlock could just go ahead and schedule them as well. I don't know that we specifically need TAC action, but we always have taken TAC action in the past to schedule some of these special meetings. Are there any thoughts on adding 3 special meetings this year? And of course, if we don't have an item to discuss during those meetings, we could just cancel them. This is just a way to get them on everybody's calendar.
Thank you, Lacey. This is Kevin. Could I get a motion from Dennis to set these 3 meetings, special meetings?
Okay, I'll move to have the special meetings in the 3 special meetings.
Thank you, Dennis. A second from Walt, Al, Lacey?
If Walt and Al are not on, I would be happy to second that.
Okay, sounds like just the 3 of us left. So it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously.
Great, thank you, Kevin. So we will, I think you'll see a calendar invite for the TAC members scheduling those meetings, and for the public, they're scheduled for August 13th, September 10th, and October 8th. Moving to item number 11, this is SGMA related updates, and we have a public outreach update from Herb.
Okay, everybody, this will be the quickest 5 slides you've probably seen in a bit. Here's our quick public outreach update. Everything is on the website for today's meeting that you're gonna see today, and you could always reach out and ask me any questions as well. Okay, next slide I'm gonna go to here. If I can get it to move. We'll just do it this way then. Okay, we held 2 virtual GSA workshops on the 8th. Many of you are familiar with that. We had a session at 11, a session at 5. There were 35 people who attended, and you see the list of topics we covered there, mainly about the process of the GSP and the technical tools. We're finalizing summary notes right now, and those will be ended up being, well, after they're approved, they'll be posted on the site so everyone could kind of see that depiction of what occurred for record-keeping purposes. And we're planning a virtual workshop, the next one, topic to be determined, for late August, early September is most likely. So stay tuned for that. We advertised in order to get attendance up there. We spent $60, which is relatively cheap for advertising, and you see the reach there of around 8,200 and people and change saw it, and you see some information there is where most of them saw it on their mobile Facebook feed, and that directed people to our website to encourage attendance. We also announced our stakeholder assessment survey, which I'm going to talk about a little bit here now. A 13-question survey that gets information and concerns from stakeholders. Ideally within the Turlock Subbasin is what we're looking to get, because that's who will be kind of seeing the results of what is in our GSP, but certainly it's open to everybody, and there's categories there that support that as people fill that out. And we're keeping it open indefinitely, and people can go to surveymonkey.com /Turlock Sigma. You see the URL down there, and that is where people will be able to take the survey, and it's also the very first thing people see when they go to our website, and it's atop our website there too with a link. So that's our assessment survey. We're excited about that and looking forward to see what stakeholders describe as their concerns in the subbasin. And there's actually a question that discusses potential solutions as well. So turlockgroundwater.org, our website. Just to note to everybody, we experienced a brief outage last Thursday and Friday. It's now up. It was a small issue that was resolved. We have now video up on the homepage of our Sigma in the Turlock Subbasin video has been moved to the top part of our homepage so that people can see that to keep our website fresh. We kind of move things around on the website every now and then. So noting that, we're promoting the stakeholder assessment on our promotion bar, which I mentioned earlier. And we still have a pop-up for first-time visitors to our site, encouraging them to join our email list, which has all of our interested party list individuals that have joined over the past few years. Again, we've sent more than 45 campaigns to those people. We have about almost 300 subscribers at current, and we usually send notices of meetings like this or workshops and various newsletters with important information. And that is it for me. These are our social media channels where we send out a lot of items. I just encourage people to share, and also note the Turlock Groundwater YouTube channel will have this recording up sometime tomorrow if I get moving pretty quick, early tomorrow morning. And so people can kind of recap anything from this meeting they need to see. Happy to take any questions. My guess is there probably won't be any at this point in time, but I will now either take questions or hand it over to Lacey and Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Herb. It sounds like there's no questions for you there on the public outreach. Thanks for your presentation. So our next meeting is scheduled, this is that special meeting that we just scheduled for August 13th, and then the next regular meeting is scheduled for August 27th. And if, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't open it up. Is there any other tech member who has a Sigma related update that they want to offer? Okay, it sounds like hearing none, I'll go ahead and take a motion to adjourn.
This is Karen from Series. I motion to adjourn.
Great, do we have a second?
This is Allie from Turlock. I'll second.
Great, a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all for the West Turlock. We're adjourned. Kevin, do you need to adjourn?
Sure, Dennis? Yes, I move to adjourn.
Well, East Turlock Subbasin GSA TAC is adjourned. Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. Thanks for your extra time.